Iranian strike, a foregone conclusion? Could be. For as long as I remember, the United States has tried to solve the Iranian problem without resorting to war. The United States, Trump in particular, doesn't want another war in the Middle East. But as talks remain bogged down on the same core issues, it's becoming harder and harder to avoid the sobering conclusion. If diplomacy can't stop Iran's nuclear ambition, a U.S. military strike looks more likely. The wheels fell off in 2018 after Trump withdrew from the 2015 nuclear agreement, known as the Joint Comprehensive Plan of Action. That deal supposedly placed strict limits on Iran's nuclear activities in exchange for sanction relief. It was negotiated under President Barack Obama, but was widely seen as the best possible path for Iran to acquire nuclear weapons. And then in 2020, Joe Biden's handlers sought to restore that agreement.
Trump warned Friday that limited strikes on Iran are possible. The president is pressuring Iran's government to dismantle its nuclear program. The warning comes as the United States ramps up its firepower in the Middle East. On Friday, the USS Gerald Ford aircraft carrier and 3 other warships entered the Mediterranean Sea. There are currently 13 U.S. Navy vessels in the Middle East, including another carrier, the USS Abraham Lincoln. It is the largest military buildup in the region since the Iraq War in 2003. For more, we're joined from Washington by CBS News national security contributor Samantha Vinograd. Sam, good morning.
Good morning.
So how close are we to military action against Iran?
Well, with the arrival of these additional military assets, Vlad, the president now has maximum optionality when it comes to deciding whether, when, and how he wants to conduct a strike against Iran. He now has the option to not just launch strikes into Iran, but also sensibly to ensure that to the best extent possible, U.S. forces, U.S. personnel in the region are protected if Iran chooses to retaliate. So we are much closer to war than we were before, and the president is much better prepared to launch not just limited strikes, but a more extensive and prolonged military campaign that could have real repercussions for the American people.
The core problem, which apparently eluded the Obama and Biden administration, is Iran is simply not trustworthy. Iran has been at war with us since the late 70s. The fanatical religious Ayatollah, who make no mistake calls all the shots, despises us. It will never compromise nor stray from their stated Islamic goal of converting the entire planet Earth into or under an Islamic republic. There's no possibility of compromise. There never was. No path of an agreement as long as the Ayatollah is in power. Forget what the Iranian diplomats say. We already saw this movie.
A single word is now driving the Washington-Tehran standoff: capitulated. President Donald Trump, according to his envoy, is curious why Iran hasn't yielded under mounting U.S. pressure. Warships are in position, talks are stalled, and the question hanging in the air: why hasn't Tehran blinked?
A narrow diplomatic window, a token nuclear compromise, and on the other end of the spectrum, a strike on Iran's supreme leader. As Washington weighs its next move, President Trump is facing 2 radically different paths: a limited enrichment deal with Tehran or military options that could redraw the region overnight. Behind closed doors, the Trump administration is weighing starkly different options on Iran. According to Axios, U.S. officials say Washington could consider allowing limited or token nuclear enrichment, but only if it leaves no pathway to a bomb. Publicly, the U.S. position remains zero enrichment on Iranian soil. At the same time, President Trump has been presented with military options that go far beyond targeted strikes on nuclear facilities. One scenario discussed in briefings would directly target Supreme Leader Ayatollah Ali Khamenei and his inner circle, including his son Mujtaba. Sources say multiple strike options are on the table. Diplomatically, Iran is expected to submit a written proposal within days. Foreign Minister Abbas Araghchi has indicated the draft will include political commitments and technical measures to ensure the nuclear program remains peaceful. U.S. officials say the proposal must be detailed and convincing to overcome skepticism inside the administration. The two sides remain publicly divided. Tehran insists it will not give up its right to enrichment. Trump has repeatedly said Iran must not enrich uranium at all. Yet behind the scenes, mediators from Oman and Qatar are urging both sides to craft a deal that allows each to claim victory.
From the U.S. perspective, the current impasse in these negotiations come down to a few basic points. First, Iran is demanding sanction relief up front. It wants the economic benefits before it rolls back any nuclear program. As I said, we already saw this movie. The United States already experienced what happens when concessions are made and Iran later reneges. We remember the palace of cash in the middle of the night. If sanctions are lifted and Iran drags its feet on compliance again, which it will, rebuilding international pressure becomes harder and harder. U.S. officials are not being stubborn just for the sake of it. They're trying to avoid repeating the mistakes, or maybe it was done on purpose, of past administrations. Secondly, Iran refuses to negotiate beyond the nuclear issue. But the regional context cannot be ignored. Iran's ballistic missile program continues to advance and intensify. Their continued support for their proxy forces in places like Iraq and Syria and Lebanon and Yemen continues to grow and continues to destabilize the entire region even more than it already is. From Trump's perspective, a nuclear deal that ignores the broader security picture doesn't really resolve the whole problem. Meanwhile, the clock is ticking. We're at that point. The distinction between not building a bomb and being able to build a bomb becomes dangerously thin. So just to be clear on something, Iran's stated of enriching uranium is for nuclear energy. That's their stated goal, and not for nuclear weapons. This just highlights the Ayatollah's deception. As part of the deal being negotiated now, the U.S. has agreed to allow a third party like Russia to provide enriched uranium for nuclear power. Iran refused this. I just want to be clear on something here. Nuclear energy requires a uranium enrichment of about 3%. Iran has been enriching uranium to 60%, well on its way to the 90% required for nuclear weapons. There is no other reason to enrich uranium to those levels except to produce nuclear bombs. None. Not to mention the fact that Iran, an oil-rich nation, and really has zero interest in nuclear energy. This is not an abstract debate. A nuclear-armed Iran would reshape and destabilize the entire Middle East. It would ignite regional arms races with other countries like Egypt and Saudi Arabia, pursuing their own nuclear programs. And it would embolden the Ayatollah, giving Iran powerful weapons to expand its influence in the region. And it would directly threaten close U.S. allies, especially Israel, which has made it very clear that they will not tolerate this threat. But if Israel were to act on its own against Iran, it would be catastrophic. It would serve to unite the Iranian people to back the Ayatollah. But if the U.S. were to strike, I believe, it would have the opposite effect. It would embolden the Iranian people to overthrow their fanatical leaders. I just did a whole separate video on Iranian protest. 20, 30,000 people are getting killed or executed simply for protesting. So here's the uncomfortable truth. The risk of action has to be weighed against the risk of inaction. If diplomacy fails, and it will, and Iran continues to advance towards a nuclear weapons capability, which they will, the United States will have exactly two choices: accept a new and more dangerous nuclear Iran or use military force to prevent it? Which one do you think President Trump will choose? Hey, thanks for stopping in today to O'Reilly's Corner. I hope you guys enjoyed being here as much as I've enjoyed having you. Do me a favor on your way out the door, just smack those like and subscribe buttons, and I'll see you next time. I'm Mike O'Reilly.